Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today I want to talk about The Enemy Within, which is in 4th edition called The Enemy in the Shadows. This is the kind of campaign for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It was the very first campaign that was created for 1st edition back in the 80s. In fact, I can show you some of the covers right now because I have every Warhammer book that there is. So this was The Enemy Within, way back in the day. This came out in 1987. And I got to play this adventure, or this campaign, twice. Once in 1st edition as a player, and then in 2nd edition I ran it as a GM. It was not actually published for 2nd, and so you had to wiggle some stuff around. It was republished again in 3rd, and now again in 4th as Enemy in the Shadows. And why am I saying all of that? Well, because it matters to me. This is one of the greatest role-playing campaigns ever written. I think the only reason that it is not right in first place is that the final bit of it kind of falls apart, which is unfortunate. I think Great Pendragon campaign still carries that title. But when they produced the Warhammer role-playing game back in the 80s, they knew that they needed an adventure to go with it. And so Graeme Davies started working on this, and produced this one. And The Enemy Within starts with, the campaign is called I don't know what the campaign is called. It's the Enemy Within campaign. But it was in 6 parts. The Enemy Within, Shadows over Bogenhofen, Death on the Reich, Power Behind the Throne, Something Rotten in Kislev, and Empire in Flames. This thing that we're looking at now covers the first 2. It has The Enemy Within, and it has Shadows over Bogenhofen, hence they call it Enemy in the Shadows. Now, the Warhammer Fantasy Miniatures game, which came first, was very war-focused, as a miniatures game typically is. And so when they started creating the role-playing game and they started really looking into, well, what would an adventure in this setting look like? The Enemy in the Shadows campaign, The Enemy Within, really helped establish the new vibe, the new tone and feel that the role-playing game would have, separate from the miniatures game. It is not about war. It is not about big, huge armies crashing against each other. And to some extent, it is not even really about combat, though it does have combat in it. Instead, what the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game does, and does very well, is it feels almost like a Call of Cthulhu adventure set in kind of a grungy Renaissance fantasy Europe. And that is because of The Enemy Within. It is entirely focused on this kind of small investigation as people encounter various cults of chaos and various nefarious influences inside of the Empire, and then that are attempting to bring the Empire down from within. And so instead of, if all you know about Warhammer is, big, huge armies clashing on the field of battle, that's not what this is about. This is about a handful of people going through the back alleys and the gutters and the sewers, trying to find and root out and destroy these cults of chaos that are weakening the Empire and trying to destroy it, and with it, all of the people who live there. The 4th edition version of this, Enemy in the Shadows, is fantastic. I had a chance 2 years ago at Gen Con to talk to Graeme Davis about this. And the thing that he was most excited about, because this has been reprinted so many different times, is what he calls the grognard boxes. And you can see this here. Let's get you a closer up view of this. So down here in the bottom of the page here, it talks about the grognard boxes. And if you, like me, have played this adventure multiple times, the grognard boxes are a way of saying, here's something different. You've encountered this situation before. You've been in this room or you've met this NPC. You know what's going on. You know that they're lying. You know why they're lying. You know what the truth is. How can you make this fresh again? This is designed for that. And so if you play through the whole thing as a brand new player who's never done Enemy Within before, you can. And it's exciting and it's thrilling and you get to experience this wonderful role-playing campaign that the rest of us already love. If you have played through it before, these grognard boxes will show up, and let's see if I can find a good example of one somewhere, because this just introduces them. They will show up and say, hey, you can change this if you want to, and make it different. So here we go. So for example, right here, the adventure begins in an inn, and that's on purpose, and we'll talk about that later. But if you've played through the adventure, you know who all the people in the inn are, you know who all these NPCs are. Well, here's a little thing that says, here, you can change this in key ways. And it just gives your game master advice on how to tweak things so that it can continue to surprise people who have already played through this before. And some of them are small, and some of them are much more extensive. But anyway, it's super awesome. Now, let's go back and talk about the inn thing. The adventure, like I said, the campaign is split into 6 pieces. And the first one, Enemy Within, is mostly just travel. You start at an inn on the side of the road, and you'll travel through Altdorf, which is the capital of the empire, and then you'll hop on a boat and go down the canal to Bogenhofen, which is one of these kind of trade towns. And this is all on purpose. This whole first thing almost serves as a prologue to the adventure, because it is introducing you to a handful of the important NPCs. Some of them you don't realize are important yet. More than that, it is introducing you to the themes of the campaign. You get to know right off the bat that there is, trouble in the empire. There are all various political situations that are kind of a powder keg, and then of course there is the forces of chaos that are trying to destroy it from within. And so on top of that, you also are introduced to the empire itself. You have this little travelogue as you go along a road. You go through the capital, you visit small towns, you visit big towns, you visit the biggest town of all, which is Altdorf, and you get to experience inns and road travel and canal travel and all of this, all as an introduction to say, here's the empire, here's what it's like, here's why it's worth saving, here are the major themes that are going to be affecting you over the course of the next 6 campaign supplements, and then throw you into it. And then by the time you get to Bogenhofen, you start part 2, Shadows over Bogenhofen, and that's the real nitty-gritty, Cthulhu-esque, old gods and cultists are trying to destroy the world kind of adventure. And so the way that the thing is built is really just ingenious. I don't know how many campaign supplements that I've ever played before take the time to do a sort of prologue that establishes the world and the characters and the themes before getting you into the rest of the adventure. And that's not to say that that early stuff is boring. That early stuff is fantastically interesting. It involves a really cool, it's not really a spoiler because it's virtually the first thing that happens. One of the characters, as you're going along the inn and, you in a carriage and traveling along the road, you come across the very first encounter that you have is another carriage that has been destroyed and attacked by mutants. And once you've dealt with them and you have a chance to look at everything, you realize that there is one of these dead characters there is an absolute doppelganger of one of the PCs. So one of your players suddenly realizes, oh my gosh, I look exactly like this guy. Why is that? And then you rifle through his pockets and you find a letter saying that this guy has this massive inheritance that he can collect in the town of Bogenhofen. And so immediately your players are invested in this. And they're like, well, if we go to Bogenhofen, we get this huge estate. We get all this money. This is going to be fantastic. It should go without saying that there's going to be a lot of other things going on, and that case of mistaken identity is going to spin the characters off into a completely different and much more perilous journey and adventure than they were ready for. So it starts off with an exciting thing and a mystery. It invests the characters immediately. You have plenty of combat. You have tons of social interaction. You have chances to explore the world. You get to see all these different parts of it. And then, of course, you get to Bogenhofen. And that's where it really buckles down. And rather than getting to know the Empire, you get to know this one town. Who are the people that work there and live there? Who are the people that are in charge? Who are the people that are running it, down on the docks and in the butcher shops and, actually doing all the work? And how is this all going to work? And what is really going on behind the scenes? This is such a good campaign. I can't even tell you. And like I said, it does kind of fall apart at the end. You get through the first 4 parts, which are Enemy Within and Shadows over Bogenhofen, that are included in this book. And then you get to... now I can't remember what the third one's called. That's the one I always remember. Death on the Reich and Power Behind the Throne. And those are not published yet for 4th edition, although I assume that they are coming because the company has promised that they are. And I know that Graeme Davis is working on them. And though that builds, those are all wonderful. Those are all fantastic. I recommend them all wholeheartedly. And we will, as those later volumes get published, delve into them in more detail. Once you get to number 5, Something Rotten in Kislev, that one is a little interesting because Kislev is not part of the Empire. It's like if the Empire is old Germany, then Kislev is old fake magical fantasy Russia. And so the idea that you would leave everything that you're doing and all of the mysteries that you have been encountering and fighting against and go off to Kislev instead for a side quest seems strange. And it does serve a narrative purpose in that by the time you get back, part 6 is called Empire in Flames. Things are falling apart and it's terrible. And so 5 kind of bridges that gap and says, hey, you had to leave to deal with this other problem. When you come back, all the problems you left behind have gotten worse. A lot of players, myself included, don't really love Something Rotten in Kislev, and I wouldn't be surprised if during this 4th edition revision of the campaign they do some tweaks to it. I have no idea if that's going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised. And then part 6, Empire in Flames, is a little more railroady than the rest. It as a single adventure supplement, campaign supplement, it works well. As a culmination of the 6-part greatest role-playing campaign you've ever played, it kind of doesn't feel great. But like I said, they're in the process of revising and rewriting and, getting everything better and newer and more awesome for 4th edition, and I'm confident that they're going to do some really awesome stuff with those later ones. But for now, don't worry about those. You will still love every single second of the first 4, including especially the first 2, which are here in The Enemy in the Shadows. Now, there's a whole campaign companion book that goes with this one. And so I'm going to talk about that a little later on in the year. But for now, The Enemy in the Shadows, if all you have is the core book for Warhammer Fantasy, 4th edition, and Enemy in the Shadows, you are set for months. It is a wonderful game. It's a wonderful adventure. And I really think that you're going to like it. So, this is your chance to play one of the most historically significant role-playing campaigns that helped kind of establish not only Warhammer Fantasy, but a lot of what we've been doing in the role-playing world for the last 4 decades. So, hooray for that. Anyway, Shadows, Enemy in the Shadows for Warhammer Fantasy is wonderful, and I hope that you love it as much as I do. Thank you for watching this review, and I will see you around on my next one. Bye.